Greetings. Today we'll see a lecture on integration of carbohydrate, protein and lipid metabolism. This is nothing but how the metabolism of carbohydrate, protein and lipid are interlinked. So we'll see how it is interlinked in the upcoming slides. First of all, we'll see what is metabolism. Metabolism is the sum of all catabolic and anabolic reactions. Catabolic reaction is nothing but the breakdown of complex molecule into the simpler substances, during which the energy will be produced during the catabolic reactions. However, in anabolic reaction, the complex substances will be formed using the simpler units, and during this process, ATP is required for the anabolic reaction. So, sum of both catabolic and anabolic reactions together called as metabolism. And here the picture depicts how the complex substances, when we consume, get digested and absorbed into a simpler one, and how the ATP is produced. This slide shows you the overview of metabolism. So far, you have seen the metabolism of carbohydrate, lipid, and protein. In all the metabolism, you have got both anabolic and catabolic pathways. The anabolic pathways always involves the synthesis. That means formation of the complex substances from using simpler units. So it is always involving the synthesis. So here the gluconeogenesis, which means genesis here refers to the synthesis of glucose. Glucogenesis means the synthesis of glucose, that is comes in anabolic pathways of carbohydrate metabolism, and gluconeogenesis means the synthesis of glucose from non-carbohydrate source. And when you go to catabolic pathways, glycolysis, glycogenolysis, HMP shunt, TCA cycle, these are all the pathways which involve in the generation of energy. So during this process, the complex substances will be broken down into simpler one, during which the ATP will be generated. So these are all the catabolic pathways you have seen in the carbohydrate metabolism. Similarly, in lipid metabolism, the de novo synthesis of fatty acid and ketogenesis, ketone body synthesis, these are all comes in the anabolic process, where anabolic pathways, whereas in your catabolic pathways, beta oxidation of fatty acid. During the oxidation of fatty acid, you release acetyl CoA, which then enters into the TCA cycle to produce more of energy. And also in protein metabolism, which involves a glucogenic and ketogenic amino acid, which gets converted into the intermediates of TCA cycle. So that will also be coming under your anabolic process, whereas deamination of amino acid, urea cycle will come in your catabolic pathways. So this just gives you the overview of metabolism, which comes in the anabolic and catabolic categories. And this slide shows you the integration of major metabolic pathways of energy metabolism. So how the major metabolism are interlinked. Before that, we'll have to see what are all the major metabolism which happens in our system. First is the glycolysis. Glycolysis is nothing but breakdown of glucose to pyruvate, and then pyruvate will be converted into acetyl CoA. And this acetyl CoA enters into citric acid cycle, and there it gets oxidized to carbon dioxide, and during this process the energy is trapped in the form of reducing equivalent, that is NADH and FADH2. And the another important pathway of carbohydrate metabolism is HMP shunt, that is exos monophosphate shunt. This HMP shunt is mostly concerned with the liberation of NADPH and ribose sugar. So NADPH is always required for the biosynthetic reactions, such as biosynthesis of fatty acid, biosynthesis of cholesterol. So for the synthesis reaction, this NADPH is required, and the ribose sugar is a precursor for the nucleotides and nucleic acid. This acts as a precursor for the nucleic acids. And another important pathway involved in carbohydrate metabolism is gluconeogenesis. Gluconeogenesis is nothing but synthesis of glucose from non-carbohydrate source, which means from your lipid, from your amino acid, through which you synthesize glucose. And next is your glycogen metabolism. Glycogen is the storage form of the glucose, and it is acts as a fuel reservoir of energy. And when this involves two pathway, one is glycogenesis. Glycogenesis is nothing but synthesis of glycogen from the glucose source. So when you have excess of glucose, the glucose will undergo glycogenesis to form glycogen and get stored in the liver or muscle. When you have deprivation of glucose, your consumption of glucose is reduced. So the stored glycogen will undergo lysis. That process is called glycogenolysis. So during which process the degradation of glycogen it will be taking place, resulting in the release of energy. The another important lipid metabolism involved is fatty acid oxidation, where the fatty acid gets oxidized to release more of your acetyl CoA, and this in turn enters into TCA cycle to release more of your reducing equivalent, that is NADH and FADH2, to generate energy. Similarly, in amino acid, protein metabolism, the glucogenic amino acid acts as a precursor of glucose, and ketogenic amino acid acts as a precursor of acetyl CoA. This in turn enters into the TCA cycle to release more of your NADH2, FADH2. This FADH2 and NADH2 from TCA cycle enters into electron transport chain, and there it coupled with oxidative phosphorylation to generate ATP. So from all the major metabolism, the end product will be the release of energy and oxidation of carbon, and oxidation, and gets oxidized into water and carbon dioxide. And this slide shows you how the interrelation between the three metabolic reactions or three metabolic pathways happens, will be shown in different stages. Stage 1 is the hydrolysis stage, where the complex substances is converted into simpler units. That means the glycogens gets broken down into glucose, the lipids get converted into glycerol and fatty acid, and proteins will be converted into amino acids. So these simpler units can either be oxidized or used for the synthesis of new substances. But during the first stage, hydrolysis stage, there will be very less amount of energy is released. And this stage 2 is your preparatory stage, where from stage 1 you have produced more of the simplest compounds such as glucose, glycerol, fatty acid, amino acid. Those components, simplest components, they undergo oxidation in the preparatory stage to produce more of acetyl CoA. Say for example, the glucose, glycerol, they get converted into pyruvate by glycolysis to produce more of your acetyl CoA. Similarly, the fatty acid gets oxidized to produce more of your acetyl CoA, and glucogenic amino acid gets converted into acetyl CoA, where ketogenic amino acids convert into alpha ketoglutarate, which is an intermediate of TCA cycle. So during this preparatory stage, you will be releasing very small amount of energy in the form of ATP. And stage 3 is the oxidative stage. During this stage, the acetyl CoA is synthesized from the previous stage. That means from the preparatory stage enters into the TCA cycle. There it gets oxidized to produce more of carbon dioxide and water. So whatever food we consume, the carbohydrate, lipid or protein, they are in the process of energy production, they all get converted or oxidized to carbon dioxide and water. So during the TCA cycle, the end products are the reducing equivalent, that is NADH and FADH2. This reducing equivalent then enters into electron transport chain. There it gets linked to the oxidative phosphorylation, leading to the release of more energy in a form of ATP. So during the oxidative stage, you will be releasing more ATPs when compared to preparatory and your hydrolysis stage. We'll see the how three stages are interlinked in the next slide. As I told you earlier, this slide shows you the different stages of metabolism of carbohydrate, lipid, and protein. See, from the lipid, during the hydrolysis stage, from the lipid you will be obtaining fatty acid glycerol, and glycogen will be broken down into glucose, and protein will be broken down into amino acid. This is the hydrolysis stage, where the complex substances get converted into the simpler one. In preparatory stage, all your simple units, they gets further converted into acetyl CoA. So see how the glucose, it gets oxidized, or it undergo glycolysis pathway to form acetyl CoA, and more your amino acids from the protein source will be converted into acetyl CoA, and also the fatty acid, again it goes oxidation to form acetyl CoA, and glycerol will also enter into the glycolysis to produce more of your acetyl CoA. So in the preparatory stage, the what you will be producing more is the acetyl CoA. This acetyl CoA in turn enters into the oxidative stage. That is, it gets entered into TCA cycle. That is the oxidative stage, where it gets oxidized and converted into carbon dioxide and water. And during the oxidative stage, you will be entrapping all the energy rich component into the reducing equivalents, that is NADH and FADH2. This in turn enters into the electron transport chain to produce more of your energy. So each metabolism, it has got a hydrolysis phase, preparatory phase, and oxidative phase. In the hydrolysis phase, all your complex molecules will be broken down into simpler units, and in the preparatory stage, the simpler components will undergo oxidation to yield acetyl CoA. In the oxidative stage, the acetyl CoA enters into the TCA cycle to produce more of your reducing equivalent and carbon dioxide and water. This reducing equivalent in turn enters into ETC to generate more of your energy. That comes in your oxidative stage. So in your oxidative stage only, you will be generating more of your energy when compared to preparative and hydrolysis stage. This pathway, this picture gives you the overall pathway and how all the metabolism are interrelated. And this slide shows you the regulation of metabolic pathways. Each metabolic pathways is regulated upon by various mechanisms, which includes availability of the substrate. So, depending on the substrate's availability, the metabolic pathways can be it can be controlled. And similarly, the covalent modification of enzymes, if many enzymes is inhibited by any other means, so the enzyme activity cannot be performed as expected. That can also affect the metabolic pathway. Similarly, allosteric regulation means some substrate can go and activate other enzyme, so this can also trigger the metabolic pathways, or sometimes it can shut down the metabolic pathways. And regulation of enzyme synthesis, enzyme synthesis can also regulate the metabolic pathways. So these are all the various mechanisms which can regulate the metabolic pathways. And in this slide, we'll see how the role of liver in the well-fed and starvation condition. So, liver is the central organ which is majorly involved in the metabolism of carbohydrate, lipid, and protein. So, we'll see the role of liver in well-fed and starvation condition. So, during the well-fed condition, the carbohydrate metabolism, the glucose will be undergo glucolysis, glucogenesis, and HMP shunt. And no glucose will be formed from the non-carbohydrate source. That means the gluconeogenesis will be reduced. But the increased glycolysis and glycogenesis and HMP shunt will be resulted in the well-fed diet. However, during starvation, when you are deprived of glucose, so your system try to get glucose, it try to make glucose from the non-carbohydrate source. So there will be an increase in gluconeogenesis and also glycogenolysis from the stored glycogen. So stored glycogen get broken down to release you more of the glucose. So during the starvation condition, there will be increased of gluconeogenesis and glycogenolysis. However, in well-fed state, in carbohydrate metabolism, there will be increased glycolysis, glycogenesis, HMP shunt, and reduced gluconeogenesis. And when you come to lipid metabolism, in the well-fed diet, the fatty acid synthesis will be increased, because excess of carbohydrate or excess of lipid food can deviate into the formation of or synthesis of new fatty acid, and triacyl glycerol synthesis will also be increased. So during the starvation condition, so when you are deprived of the carbohydrate source, the other source for the energy production is lipid. So the lipid will undergo lysis, and they produce more, and they undergo oxidation to produce more of energy. So beta oxidation of fatty acid will be resulted during the starvation condition. And also ketogenesis. Ketogenesis means synthesis of ketone bodies is one of the other important another important molecule which can supply energy to the central organ, that is brain. And next is your protein metabolism. So in protein metabolism, during the well-fed state, there will be more amino acid degradation and protein synthesis. So during the well-fed diet, the protein will be synthesized and new proteins will be synthesized, and many amino acids will be degraded. And during the starvation condition, all the glucogenic and ketogenic amino acid gets converted into TCA intermediates, which then used for the purpose of energy generation. This is the role of the liver, which plays a central role in the metabolism during the well-fed and the starvation condition. And with this, your interrelation between the all three metabolism gets over. If you have any further clarification, you can mail me.